You wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is check your phone, not because you want to, because some part of your mind already feels behind. You scroll through notifications while still lying in bed. An unread message tightens your chest a little. An email instantly pulls your brain into tomorrow's problems. Before your feet even touch the floor, your nervous system is already awake, alert, preparing for something bad to happen. And maybe nothing actually happens that day. You go to work. You answer people. You smile during conversations. You make it through your responsibilities like everyone else. But underneath all of it, your mind never fully relaxes. Even during quiet moments, there is tension. You replay conversations after they end. You overanalyze simple interactions. You prepare for worst-case scenarios that never happen. Sometimes you feel exhausted for no visible reason at all, and the hardest part is trying to explain that exhaustion to people who cannot see what is happening inside your head. Because anxiety is strange like that. It can make your body feel unsafe even when your life looks completely normal, and after enough time, you stop questioning it. You start believing this is just who you are. An overthinker, a worrier, someone who is too sensitive, someone whose brain simply refuses to slow down. But what if that is not true? What if your anxiety is not your personality? What if your mind did not become anxious by accident, but by adaptation that changes everything? Because the truth is, most anxious people are not weak. In fact, many of them became anxious because they spent years trying to survive emotionally unpredictable environments. Chronic stress, pressure, disappointment, overstimulation, rejection, uncertainty, and the constant feeling that they always needed to stay mentally prepared. Over time, the brain learns a dangerous lesson. Staying alert keeps me safe. And eventually, your nervous system becomes so used to survival mode that peace itself starts feeling unfamiliar. That is why silence can feel uncomfortable. That is why rest creates guilt. That is why your mind keeps searching for problems even during good moments. Your brain is trying to protect you, but it no longer knows when to stop. I remember realizing that one night while sitting alone in my apartment after an incredibly normal day. Nothing bad had happened, no emergency, no crisis. Yet my body felt tense as if something terrible was about to happen at any moment. My shoulders were tight. My jaw hurt from clenching it all day. I checked my phone every few minutes without even thinking, and when I finally put the phone down, the silence itself felt uncomfortable. That was the moment I understood something I wish someone had explained to me years earlier. My body was resting, but my nervous system never was. And maybe you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe your mind became so trained to anticipate stress that calm now feels unnatural. Maybe you became addicted to preparing for pain before pain even arrives. Maybe you have lived inside survival mode for so long that you forgot what emotional safety even feels like. If that sounds familiar, this audiobook is for you. Because anxiety is not random, it is a hidden system. And once you understand the system, you can slowly begin shutting it down. So if someone came into your mind while listening to this, someone silently carrying pressure, fear, exhaustion, or emotional overwhelm, share this video with them. Sometimes people do not need more advice. Sometimes they just need to finally feel understood. Chapter 1. Your brain became addicted to danger. There are people who cannot relax even when nothing is wrong, not because they want drama, not because they enjoy stress, but because their nervous system no longer trusts peace. You can see it in small moments. The way they check their phone every few minutes without realizing it. The way silence makes them uneasy. The way they mentally prepare for conversations before they happen, replay them afterward, and somehow still feel like they missed something important. Their body sits in a safe room while their mind keeps searching for danger, and after enough years, this state of the hyper-alertness starts feeling normal. A friend of mine once told me something I never forgot. He said, "I don't know what happened to me. I used to know how to relax." At the time, he was doing well in life, good job, stable income, nice apartment downtown. The kind of life most people would assume brings peace. But every time we met, he looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted, mentally exhausted. He would check his work messages during dinner. He apologized constantly for things that did not need apologies. If someone took too long to reply to a text, he immediately assumed he had done something wrong. One night, while we were sitting outside after work, his phone battery died unexpectedly. And I watched panic take over his entire body. Not irritation. Panic. He kept tapping the black screen over and over, breathing faster, looking around as if something terrible had just happened. Then he laughed awkwardly and said, "I hate not knowing if someone needs me." That sentence stayed with me because it revealed something deeper. His brain had stopped associating constant alertness with stress. It associated it with safety. That is the hidden trap of anxiety. After enough emotional pressure, the nervous system begins treating vigilance like protection. Your mind starts believing that if you stay mentally prepared at all times, you can prevent pain before it arrives. So you overthink, you anticipate, you monitor, you stay emotionally on. And eventually, your body forgets how to power down. The dangerous part is that modern life rewards this behavior. People praise you for being responsive, productive, available, hyper-aware, always thinking ahead. But there is a difference between being responsible and living in survival mode. One creates stability. The other slowly destroys your ability to feel peace. The anxious brain does something strange over time. It stops reacting only to real danger and begins reacting to possibility. A delayed text becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes catastrophe. A quiet moment becomes suspicious. Your nervous system starts asking, "What am I missing right now?" Even happiness becomes difficult to enjoy because part of your brain is already preparing for how it could disappear. That is why anxiety is exhausting. Not because something bad is always happening, but because your mind never stops preparing for something bad to happen. And the longer this continues, the more unfamiliar calm begins to feel. That realization hit me personally a few years ago during a weekend trip with friends. We rented a cabin outside the city. No noise, no traffic, no constant notifications. Just silence, trees, and a lake behind the house. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I felt restless the entire first day. I kept reaching for my phone even when nobody had texted me. I walked around checking things for no reason. At one point, I sat outside near the water, and the silence itself felt uncomfortable. That moment disturbed me because I realized something I had never admitted before. My nervous system had become addicted to stimulation. Stillness felt unnatural because my brain had spent years rehearsing stress. And maybe you know what that feels like too. Maybe you became so used to emotional tension that peace now feels unfamiliar. Maybe your mind keeps creating problems because uncertainty feels unsafe. Maybe you have lived in survival mode for so long that your body no longer knows the difference between danger and discomfort. This is where many people misunderstand anxiety. They think the problem is fear itself, but often the deeper problem is conditioning. Your brain learned to associate vigilance with survival. Maybe because of childhood unpredictability. Maybe because of emotional pressure. Maybe because you had to grow up too fast. Maybe because life rewarded you for staying alert. Over time, the pattern became automatic. That is why anxious people are often highly aware of everything around them. Tone changes, facial expressions, energy shifts, tiny details other people miss. Their nervous system is constantly scanning. Not because they are weak, because their brain adapted too well. And once you understand that, something important begins to change. You stop seeing yourself as broken. You start seeing yourself as conditioned. That shift matters more than most people realize, because people who believe they are broken usually attack themselves. But people who understand they were conditioned begin approaching themselves differently, with awareness, patience, curiosity. Healing begins there, not in forcing yourself to calm down, not in shaming yourself for overthinking, but in realizing your mind learned these patterns for a reason. The nervous system does not randomly choose survival mode. It enters survival mode because at some point staying alert felt necessary. The problem is that many people survive the stressful chapter of their life, while their nervous system never leaves it. So the goal is not to hate the anxious part of yourself. The goal is to slowly teach your brain that it no longer has to prepare for danger every second of the day, because your mind is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect a version of you that still believes the world is unsafe. Chapter 2. Overthinking is the illusion of control. Overthinking rarely begins as anxiety. At first it feels responsible. It feels like preparation. You tell yourself you are simply being careful, thinking ahead, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to protect yourself from embarrassment, disappointment, failure, rejection, conflict, uncertainty. But slowly, almost invisibly, the habit grows. And one day you realize your mind is no longer helping you live life. It is trying to rehearse life before it happens. That is the exhausting part about overthinking. Your body experiences events that never actually occur. A friend of mine once spent 3 days convinced he was about to lose his job because his manager ended a meeting earlier than usual. That was it. No warning. No criticism, no actual evidence, just a short meeting. But his mind immediately filled in the blanks. Maybe she sounded colder than normal. Maybe he said something wrong last week. Maybe they were replacing him. Maybe everyone else knew something he didn't. By the second night, he could barely sleep. His stomach hurt constantly. He reread old emails searching for proof that something was wrong. Then 3 days later, his manager casually told the team she'd been rushing home that afternoon because her dog was sick. That was the entire explanation. Nothing was wrong. But his body had already lived through 3 days of fear as if the threat had been real. That is what overthinking does. It turns uncertainty into emotional reality, and the dangerous part is that the brain mistakes this process for protection. Overthinking creates the illusion that if you mentally prepare for every possible outcome, you can somehow avoid pain before it arrives. So your mind keeps searching, searching for hidden meanings, searching for signs, searching for certainty. But certainty never fully comes, which means the thinking never ends. That is why anxious people often feel mentally exhausted even after physically resting. Their body may be sitting still, but internally the mind has been running for hours, sometimes all night. One of the hardest truths about anxiety is this: your thoughts are not always trying to tell you the truth. Sometimes they are trying to protect you from fear, and those are two very different things. The anxious brain often treats imagination like evidence. A delayed response becomes abandonment. A strange facial expression becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes catastrophe. The mind starts predicting emotional disasters before reality even has a chance to unfold. And after enough repetition, overthinking becomes automatic. You no longer choose it consciously. Your nervous system enters the loop before you even realize it started. I remember going through a period where I replayed nearly every conversation after it ended, especially at night. I would lie in bed and suddenly remember one sentence I said earlier that day. Then my brain would begin dissecting it from every possible angle. Did I sound awkward? Did they misunderstand me? Did I say too much? Did I annoy them? The terrifying part was not the thoughts themselves. It was how real they felt. My body reacted as if social rejection was happening in real time. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, sleep disappeared completely, and yet most of those conversations were completely normal. That realization changed something for me. I began understanding that overthinking was not actually solving problems. It was trying to eliminate uncertainty. But life does not allow complete certainty, which means an anxious mind will always find another problem to solve. That is why overthinking becomes addictive, not because people enjoy suffering, but because thinking creates temporary emotional control. Even painful thoughts can feel safer than uncertainty. Read that again carefully. For many anxious people, certainty matters more than peace, even negative certainty. That is why some people would rather imagine the worst-case scenario than sit inside the discomfort of not knowing what will happen, because uncertainty makes the nervous system feel exposed. And once you see this pattern clearly, another realization begins to appear. The problem is not that your mind thinks too much. The problem is that your mind no longer knows when to stop protecting you. That changes the way you respond to yourself. Instead of fighting every anxious thought, you begin observing the deeper fear underneath it. Usually, the fear is not actually about the situation itself. It is about what the situation might mean emotionally. Rejection, failure, embarrassment, loss of control, not being enough. Overthinking is often emotional self-protection disguised as intelligence. That is why highly intelligent people are not immune to anxiety. In fact, sometimes they suffer more intensely because their mind becomes better at generating endless possibilities. The brain becomes a machine constantly manufacturing future scenarios, most of which never happen. But the body still pays the price for all of them. At some point, I started noticing something strange in my own life. The moments when I felt most peaceful were not the moments when I had solved every problem. They were the moments when I temporarily stopped trying to control everything mentally. Walking outside without my phone, listening to rain without multitasking, driving without replaying conversations in my head, sitting quietly without immediately reaching for stimulation. Those small moments taught me something powerful. Peace does not come from finally predicting every outcome correctly. Peace comes from teaching the nervous system that uncertainty is survivable. That is the shift anxious people desperately need. Because healing is not becoming someone who never has fearful thoughts. Healing is becoming someone who no longer believes every fearful thought deserves obedience. Your mind can imagine danger without you entering survival mode. Your thoughts can exist without becoming commands, and the moment your nervous system begins learning that, everything slowly starts changing. You sleep differently. You breathe differently. You move through life differently. Not because life suddenly becomes safe, but because your mind slowly realizes it does not need to prepare for pain every second of the day anymore. Chapter 3. Hypervigilance. Avoidance is quietly expanding your fear. Most people think anxiety ruins their life through panic, but often anxiety destroys life much more quietly than that, through avoidance. Not dramatic avoidance. Small avoidance, the kind that slowly becomes invisible. You stop replying to messages right away because you don't feel ready. You delay difficult conversations until they become heavier in your mind. You cancel plans at the last minute because staying home feels emotionally safer. You avoid opportunities that might expose you to discomfort, judgment, uncertainty, failure, embarrassment. At first, these decisions feel harmless. Sometimes they even feel like self-protection. But over time, something dangerous begins happening underneath the surface. Your world starts shrinking. And the terrifying part is that most people do not notice it happening until years have already passed. I once had a neighbor named Daniel who used to be incredibly social. Every Friday night he hosted people at his apartment, music playing, friends laughing, always inviting people over. Then slowly, almost invisibly, he started disappearing. At first he stopped coming to larger gatherings. Then he stopped answering calls consistently. Then even small things became difficult for him. Going to the grocery store, meeting new people, returning messages, being seen. One evening, I ran into him outside our building after not seeing him for months. We talked for a while, and eventually he admitted something quietly that stayed with me for years. He said, "Every time I avoid something stressful, I feel relief for a few hours. But afterward, the fear always comes back bigger." That sentence perfectly describes the trap of avoidance. Avoidance feels like safety in the moment, but it quietly teaches the nervous system something devastating. This situation really was dangerous. That is why anxiety grows stronger every time fear controls your behavior, because your brain learns through experience, not logic. You can tell yourself, there's nothing to be afraid of. But if your actions keep communicating, avoid this, escape this, hide from this, your nervous system believes the actions more than the words, and eventually fear begins spreading. Not because life became more dangerous, but because your brain lost confidence in your ability to handle discomfort. That is the hidden cost of avoidance. It slowly convinces you that you are fragile. I remember experiencing this myself during a period where my anxiety became heavily connected to social situations. Not because I disliked people. Actually, I missed connection deeply. But I became exhausted from constantly analyzing myself around others. Every interaction felt like performance. Every conversation became something I replayed afterward. Eventually, staying home started feeling emotionally easier, safer. And that is how avoidance seduces you. It offers immediate relief, but relief is not healing. Many anxious people confuse the two. There is a huge difference between something no longer hurts me and I am no longer afraid of it. Avoidance removes temporary discomfort, but it also removes the opportunity for the nervous system to learn. We survive this. That learning process matters more than most people realize, because confidence is not built through positive thinking. Confidence is built through survived experiences. Your nervous system gains trust in you every time you stay present through discomfort instead of escaping it, and the opposite is also true. Every escape quietly weakens that trust. One of the most painful moments of my own anxiety happened in a parking lot outside a friend's birthday dinner. I had already driven there. I was dressed. Everyone was inside. But I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes unable to move. My chest felt tight. My thoughts were racing. Part of me desperately wanted connection. Another part wanted to disappear completely. I remember staring at the restaurant entrance thinking, what is wrong with me? Eventually, I drove home without going inside. And the worst part was not the anxiety itself. It was the shame afterward. The feeling that my own mind had become a prison I could no longer control. That night taught me something important, though. The fear did not disappear when I avoided the situation. It grew. Because now my nervous system had new evidence. Social situations are dangerous enough to escape. That is how anxiety expands, quietly, gradually. One avoided moment at a time. And eventually, people build entire lives around emotional avoidance without realizing it. They avoid vulnerability, honesty, conflict, intimacy, risk, visibility, uncertainty. Not because they do not want those things, because fear convinced them they cannot survive them. But here is the twist most people never realize. The nervous system does not heal when life becomes comfortable. It heals when the brain experiences discomfort and survives it safely. That changes everything. Because healing anxiety is not about eliminating fear completely. It is about teaching your body. Fear does not mean danger. That lesson can only be learned through experience, slowly, gently, repeatedly. Not through force. One small conversation, one uncomfortable moment, one honest interaction, one situation you normally would have escaped. That is how the nervous system rebuilds trust. And the beautiful part is that courage rarely feels dramatic when it is happening. Sometimes courage looks incredibly small. Replying to the message, walking into the room, speaking honestly instead of pretending, staying present when your body wants to run. Most people think brave people do not feel fear. That is not true. Brave people simply stop allowing fear to make every decision for them. And eventually, something begins changing inside you. Your body starts realizing we can survive discomfort. Then slowly, we can survive uncertainty. Then eventually, maybe we were never as fragile as we believed. That is the moment healing truly begins. Not when fear disappears, but when your nervous system finally understands that discomfort is not the same thing as danger. Because anxiety survives by convincing you to avoid life. Healing begins when you slowly start returning to it. Chapter 4. Your body has been carrying anxiety for years. Most people notice anxiety in their thoughts first. The overthinking, the racing mind, the constant worrying. But eventually, anxiety stops asking permission to stay inside your head. It moves into the body. And once it does, even ordinary life can start feeling exhausting. Not because you are weak. Because your nervous system was never designed to stay in survival mode for this long. I remember going through a season of life where my body felt constantly tense. Even during completely normal moments. I would wake up tired after a full night of sleep. My jaw hurt from clenching it while I slept. My shoulders always felt tight. Some afternoons my chest felt heavy for no clear reason at all. At first I ignored it. I told myself I was just stressed, busy, overworked. That is what most people do. They normalize symptoms that are actually signals, and the body keeps trying to communicate louder. One afternoon I was sitting at a coffee shop trying to answer emails when suddenly my heart started beating harder, for no obvious reason. My breathing became shallow. My hands felt cold. I remember looking around the room thinking something terrible was about to happen, but nothing was happening. Nobody else in the room even noticed me. That moment scared me deeply because I realized my body had learned anxiety so well that it could activate fear automatically. No crisis required. That is one of the hardest truths about chronic anxiety. The body can remain loyal to survival patterns long after the danger is gone. Many people think anxiety only exists in the mind, but the nervous system remembers things the conscious brain tries to move past. It remembers unpredictability. It remembers emotional tension. It remembers years of hypervigilance. It remembers never truly feeling safe. And eventually, the body begins carrying stress like armor. Tight muscles, shallow breathing, digestive problems, fatigue, insomnia, constant tension. The terrifying part is that many anxious people become so used to these sensations that they stop recognizing them as abnormal. Stress becomes their baseline. One woman I knew described it perfectly. She said, "I didn't realize how anxious I was until my body finally relaxed for the first time." That sentence stayed with me because it revealed something heartbreaking. Some people have lived in survival mode for so long that peace feels unfamiliar to their own body. And when calm feels unfamiliar, the nervous system often mistakes calm for danger. That is why some people become restless during silence, why vacations feel uncomfortable, why weekends create anxiety instead of relief, why stillness feels almost unnatural. Their body became addicted to stress hormones without realizing it. The nervous system adapted to urgency, and modern life quietly reinforces this condition every day. Too much stimulation, too much noise, too much information, too much pressure to always be productive, available, responsive, improving, performing. Most people never truly stop. Their body rests physically while their nervous system remains emotionally awake. That creates a dangerous disconnect. You can lie in bed for 8 hours and still wake up exhausted because rest is not only physical, The nervous system must feel safe enough to release tension too, and many people never learned how to do that. A few years ago, I visited my parents for a weekend after months of nonstop work and emotional stress. The first night there, I woke up around 3 in the morning completely alert for no reason. The house was silent, everyone was asleep, but my body felt tense as if I needed to prepare for something. I remember sitting in the dark kitchen drinking water and realizing something strange. I had forgotten what relaxation actually felt like, not temporary distraction, not entertainment, real nervous system relaxation. That realization hit harder than I expected, because I suddenly understood that anxiety was no longer just something I experienced occasionally. My body had organized itself around it, and maybe you understand that feeling too. Maybe your body struggles to slow down even when your mind wants peace. Maybe you constantly feel tired but cannot truly rest. Maybe your nervous system became so used to urgency that stillness now feels uncomfortable. If so, there is something important you need to understand. Your body is not betraying you. It is adapting exactly the way the human nervous system was designed to adapt. The problem is not adaptation itself. The problem is remaining trapped inside survival patterns long after they stop serving you. And healing begins when you stop fighting your body and start listening to it differently. Because symptoms are not always enemies. Sometimes they are messages. Your exhaustion may be telling you that your nervous system has been overloaded for years. Your tension may be revealing how much pressure your body has been carrying silently. Your anxiety may be exposing how unsafe your internal world has felt for a very long time. That shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you begin asking, "What has my body been trying to survive?" That question creates compassion, and compassion matters deeply in healing, because anxious people often become aggressive toward themselves. They shame themselves for struggling. They criticize themselves for being emotional. They become frustrated that they cannot simply relax. But healing rarely begins through force. The nervous system does not respond well to punishment. It responds to safety. Slow breathing, quiet mornings, less stimulation, walking without constant noise, deep rest, honest conversations, moments where the body no longer feels emotionally hunted. Those small moments matter more than most people realize, because every calm moment teaches the nervous system a new possibility. We do not have to stay in survival mode forever. And over time, something beautiful begins happening. Your breathing softens, your shoulders relax without you noticing, your body stops bracing itself constantly. You begin feeling present again, not every second, not perfectly, but gradually. Because healing anxiety is not forcing the body into calm. It is patiently teaching the nervous system that the emergency is finally over. Chapter 5. The modern world is training your anxiety. Before most people even leave bed in the morning, their nervous system has already been attacked dozens of times. A notification, a headline, an email, a comparison, a bad news clip, a productivity video reminding them they are behind in life. And all of it happens before their brain has fully woken up. Modern anxiety does not only come from trauma anymore, sometimes it comes from overstimulation, relentless, nonstop mental noise. The kind that slowly teaches your nervous system that rest is irresponsible and silence is wasted time. A few years ago, I met a college student named Ava through a mutual friend. She was intelligent, ambitious, creative, constantly busy, the kind of person who looked productive every hour of the day. But every time we talked, she seemed emotionally exhausted. She struggled to focus during conversations because her attention constantly drifted back toward her phone. She could not watch a movie without checking notifications. She described feeling anxious whenever life became too quiet. One afternoon, she admitted something that perfectly captured what modern anxiety feels like. She said, "I don't even know what my real thoughts sound like anymore." That sentence hit me hard, because so many people are living exactly that way now. Their inner world has become crowded with constant external noise, and eventually the nervous system loses the ability to settle. That is one of the biggest psychological shifts happening in modern life. People no longer experience anxiety only during stressful moments. They experience it continuously in low doses all day long. Tiny spikes of stimulation, tiny spikes of comparison, tiny spikes of urgency, and the body never fully recovers between them. The human nervous system was never designed to absorb this much information this quickly for this many hours every day. But most people never stop long enough to notice the damage it is creating. Because stimulation can feel productive, even addictive. especially when silence feels uncomfortable. That is the hidden trap. Many anxious people are not only afraid of stress, they are afraid of stillness, because stillness removes distraction, and distraction has become one of the primary ways people avoid themselves emotionally. Think about how quickly most people reach for stimulation now. Waiting in line, phone, sitting alone, music, feeling uncomfortable, scroll, feeling sad, video, feeling anxious. More noise. The nervous system never gets a chance to breathe, and eventually, attention itself becomes fractured. People begin struggling to focus deeply, rest deeply, or even think clearly for long periods of time. Their brain becomes conditioned for constant novelty. That conditioning changes anxiety in dangerous ways, because overstimulated minds become hyper-reactive minds. A small inconvenience suddenly feels emotionally overwhelming because the nervous system was already overloaded before the inconvenience even happened. That is why many people feel exhausted by ordinary life now. Their body is carrying invisible cognitive weight all day long. I remember realizing this in my own life during a weekend where I decided to stay completely offline for one full day. No social media, no news, no constant checking. At first it felt almost uncomfortable. I kept instinctively reaching for my phone even when there was nothing to check. My brain searched for stimulation automatically. Silence felt strangely empty. That realization disturbed me more than I expected, because I understood something in that moment. My attention no longer belonged fully to me. And maybe that sounds dramatic at first, but look honestly at modern life. Entire industries compete for your nervous system every second of the day. Your attention is being pulled constantly toward outrage, toward comparison, toward urgency, toward fear, toward endless consumption. And anxious minds are especially vulnerable to this, because anxiety already trains the brain to scan constantly. Modern technology simply amplifies the habit. That is why some people feel mentally exhausted without understanding why. Their nervous system never experiences true silence anymore. One of the strangest symptoms of modern anxiety is that many people no longer know how to simply exist without stimulation. Driving becomes impossible without podcasts. Walking requires scrolling. Eating alone feels uncomfortable. Silence begins feeling emotionally threatening, and eventually, people lose contact with themselves. Not intentionally, gradually, quietly, one distraction at a time. There is a reason many people suddenly feel emotional the moment they finally slow down. The nervous system has been outrunning unresolved tension for years, and silence removes the escape routes. That is why healing often feels uncomfortable in the beginning. Because when the noise disappears, you finally hear what your body has been carrying underneath it all. Loneliness, fear, pressure, grief, exhaustion. But this is also where recovery begins, not through more stimulation, through reconnection. Reconnection with your own attention, your own breathing, your own thoughts, your own nervous system. I started noticing major changes in my anxiety when I slowly reduced the amount of noise constantly entering my mind. Morning walks without my phone, sitting in silence for 10 minutes, reading slowly again, listening to music without multitasking, allowing my brain to experience boredom without immediately escaping it. At first, boredom felt unbearable. Then eventually, something surprising happened. My mind became quieter, not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. Because attention works like training, what you repeatedly expose your nervous system to eventually becomes its normal state. If your brain constantly consumes urgency, comparison, outrage, and stimulation, your nervous system adapts to chaos. But if your brain repeatedly experiences stillness, slowness, presence, and silence, the nervous system slowly begins relearning safety. That is the twist most people never realize. Peace is not found. Peace is trained. And modern anxiety often has less to do with weakness, and more to do with the fact that your nervous system has been overstimulated for years without recovery. So if your mind feels tired lately, if your attention feels fragmented, if silence feels uncomfortable, there may be nothing wrong with you at all. Your nervous system may simply be begging for less noise. Because healing anxiety is not always adding more information to your life. Sometimes healing begins when you finally give your mind permission to become quiet again. Chapter 6. Some environments keep your body in survival mode. One of the hardest truths about anxiety is that sometimes the problem is not only inside your mind. Sometimes the environment around you is constantly re-triggering your nervous system. And when that happens long enough, the body stops expecting peace altogether. Many people think anxiety appears randomly. But often, anxiety is a perfectly reasonable response to living too long in emotionally unsafe environments. The problem is that human beings adapt slowly, which means people can spend years normalizing emotional chaos without realizing how deeply it is affecting them. I knew someone once who lived in a constant state of tension because of her relationship. Not physical danger, emotional unpredictability. Some days her partner was warm and affectionate, other days distant, cold, irritated over small things she could never predict. She became hyper-aware of tone changes, facial expressions, pauses in conversation, text response times. Without realizing it, her entire nervous system reorganized itself around emotional monitoring. Before speaking, she mentally rehearsed her words. Before coming home, she checked her partner's mood through subtle clues. Even hearing footsteps in the hallway made her body tense automatically. One night we talked for hours, and she finally admitted something heartbreaking. She said, "I feel like my body never fully relaxes around someone who says they love me." That sentence reveals something many anxious people never fully understand. The nervous system listens to patterns more than promises. Someone can tell you, "You're safe with me." But if your body repeatedly experiences unpredictability, criticism, emotional instability, manipulation, passive aggression, or constant tension, your nervous system believes the pattern instead of the words. And eventually, survival mode becomes your emotional baseline. That is why some people feel anxious all the time without understanding why. Their body adapted to environments where emotional safety never felt guaranteed. This happens in more places than people realize. Relationships, families, friendships, workplaces. Especially workplaces. Modern work culture quietly rewards chronic nervous system dysregulation. Urgency becomes normal. Constant availability becomes expected. Rest feels guilty. Notifications interrupt peace at every hour. Many people spend entire days emotionally bracing themselves without noticing it. One of the most anxious periods of my life happened while working in an environment where everything felt urgent all the time. Messages marked ASAP, late-night emails, constant pressure to respond quickly, fear of making mistakes. Even during weekends, my body stayed tense because mentally I never truly left work. I remember sitting at dinner with friends while secretly checking emails under the table every few minutes. Not because anyone forced me to in that exact moment, because my nervous system no longer trusted relaxation. And eventually I realized something disturbing. I was no longer reacting to actual emergencies. I was reacting to the possibility of emergencies. That is what chronic stress environments do. They train the body to anticipate pressure before pressure even arrives. Over time, your nervous system becomes hypersensitive. Small problems feel huge. Minor tension feels threatening. Silence feels suspicious. And the longer you stay in environments like this, the harder it becomes to recognize what calm is supposed to feel like. That is why many people feel strangely emotional after finally leaving toxic environments. Not because they became weaker, because the nervous system is finally exiting survival mode. I remember talking to someone who left an emotionally manipulative relationship after several years. She told me the first few weeks afterward felt strangely confusing. Not peaceful. Confusing. Because her body had become so accustomed to emotional chaos that stability felt unfamiliar. She said, "I kept waiting for something bad to happen." That is how deeply environments shape the nervous system. The body memorizes emotional climates, and many anxious people are trying to heal while still living inside the very environments teaching their body to stay afraid. That is why healing sometimes requires more than mindset shifts. Sometimes it requires boundaries, and boundaries are difficult for anxious people because many of them were taught that protecting their peace is selfish. So they tolerate emotional inconsistency, draining friendships, disrespect, chronic criticism, manipulative behavior, environments that constantly overload their nervous system. Then they wonder why their anxiety never improves. But the nervous system cannot heal in places where it never feels safe enough to unclench. That realization changed the way I viewed peace completely. I used to think peace was something emotional, a feeling you either had or didn't have. Now I understand peace more physically. Peace is what happens when your body no longer feels hunted. That changes everything. Because suddenly, protecting your nervous system becomes an act of health instead of selfishness. You become more careful about who has access to your energy, what environments you normalize, what conversations drain you, what chaos you repeatedly expose yourself to. And slowly you stop trying to force yourself to tolerate things that are quietly harming you. One of the biggest misconceptions about healing is that strong people should be able to handle everything. But emotionally healthy people do not endlessly absorb chaos. They recover. They rest. They step away. They protect their nervous system before burnout becomes destruction. That is wisdom, not weakness. And sometimes healing begins with a very simple realization. You are not anxious because you are incapable of peace. You are anxious because your body adapted to environments where peace never lasted very long. That truth creates compassion, especially for people who blame themselves constantly for struggling. Because the goal is not becoming emotionless. The goal is creating a life where your nervous system no longer has to remain defensive every second of the day. And that process starts with honesty. Honesty about what exhausts you, what destabilizes you, what environments make your body tighten automatically, and what relationships quietly keep you emotionally unsafe. Those answers matter, because your nervous system already knows what your mind keeps trying to minimize, and healing often begins the moment you finally stop calling survival normal. Chapter 7. Anxiety grows when you abandon yourself. Some people spend their entire lives trying to keep everyone around them comfortable, while quietly destroying themselves in the process. They say yes when they want to say no. They apologize for emotions that do not require apologies. They tolerate disrespect to avoid conflict. They stay silent to keep peace. They ignore exhaustion because other people need them. And after enough years, something painful begins happening internally. The nervous system stops feeling protected by the person it depends on most, you. That is one of the deepest roots of anxiety that almost nobody talks about. Sometimes anxiety is not only fear of the world, sometimes it is the emotional consequence of repeatedly abandoning yourself. I remember meeting a woman named Rachel during a period when she looked completely put together from the outside. Successful career, social, reliable, always helping everyone around her. But internally, she was exhausted. Not from work, from constantly betraying her own emotional needs. Every decision she made revolved around avoiding disappointment, avoiding rejection, avoiding conflict. She monitored other people's emotions so carefully that she barely noticed her own anymore. One night after dinner, she admitted something quietly that completely changed the way I understood anxiety. She said, "I don't think I trust myself to protect me anymore." That sentence stayed with me for a long time, because underneath so much anxiety is a nervous system that no longer feels emotionally defended. Think about how many anxious people constantly override themselves every day. They stay in conversations that drain them. They answer messages when emotionally exhausted. They force themselves to tolerate environments that make their body tense. They silence their feelings to avoid making others uncomfortable. And eventually, the body learns a devastating lesson. My needs are not safe with me. That creates internal instability, because self-trust is one of the foundations of nervous system safety. When your mind believes you will ignore exhaustion, abandon boundaries, suppress emotions, and tolerate emotional harm just to keep other people happy, it stays alert. Of course it does. Your nervous system no longer feels protected. Many people think anxiety only comes from external danger, but internal self-abandonment creates chronic emotional danger too. I realized this painfully in my own life during a period where I constantly prioritized being liked over being honest. I agreed to things I did not want. I ignored emotional discomfort because I did not want to seem difficult. I stayed emotionally available for people who rarely considered my own mental state. And outwardly, I convinced myself I was being kind. But internally, my body felt exhausted all the time. Because kindness without boundaries eventually becomes self-betrayal. That realization hurt, especially because anxious people are often deeply compassionate people. They care intensely, they empathize deeply, they want harmony. But without realizing it, they sometimes direct all of that compassion outward while abandoning themselves internally. And the nervous system notices that contradiction. One of the biggest twists in healing anxiety is realizing this. Your body does not only need protection from external stress, it needs protection from internal self-neglect too. That changes the entire conversation. Because suddenly healing becomes less about fixing anxiety and more about rebuilding trust with yourself. That process is slow and deeply emotional. At first, rebuilding self-trust looks small, telling the truth when you normally would pretend you are okay. Leaving environments that consistently drain you. Resting before burnout forces you to. Saying no without explaining yourself for 20 minutes afterward. Listening when your body says, "This is too much." Those moments matter more than people realize, because every time you honor yourself honestly, your nervous system receives new evidence. I am finally safe with this person. That sentence sounds simple, but emotionally it changes everything. I remember a moment that made this painfully clear for me. I had committed to attending an event during a period where I was already emotionally overwhelmed. All day, my body felt heavy, exhausted, drained. But part of me kept saying, "You should still go. Don't disappoint people. Don't be difficult." Then something strange happened. As I was getting ready, I suddenly realized my anxiety was not actually about the event itself. It was about the fact that I was once again ignoring my own emotional limits. That awareness stopped me completely. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had almost never considered before. What would it look like to protect my own nervous system the way I protect everyone else's? That question changed my life slowly. Not dramatically, slowly. Because healing anxiety is often less about becoming fearless, and more about becoming emotionally loyal to yourself. That means noticing when your body tightens around certain people, respecting exhaustion before collapse, speaking honestly instead of performing emotionally, and no longer abandoning yourself to maintain external approval. Many anxious people spend years searching for safety in other people's validation. But external reassurance never fully calms the nervous system when internal trust is broken. That is why reassurance addiction becomes endless. No amount of validation ever feels like enough. Because the deeper problem is not, do other people accept me? The deeper problem is, do I abandon myself when acceptance feels threatened? That is the real fear underneath much anxiety. And once you see it clearly, something powerful begins shifting. You stop viewing boundaries as selfish. You stop viewing rest as weakness. You stop viewing honesty as danger. Instead, you begin understanding that protecting your nervous system is an act of emotional responsibility, not just for yourself, for your entire life. Because eventually, the body becomes exhausted from carrying versions of you that were built only to survive other people, and healing begins the moment you finally decide, I will no longer leave myself behind just to keep everyone else comfortable. That decision changes the nervous system slowly. Your breathing softens, your body relaxes more often. Your mind stops scanning constantly for approval, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your nervous system finally starts trusting the person living inside it. And for many anxious people, that becomes the first real feeling of safety they have ever known. Chapter 8. How to shut the system down and reclaim your life. Healing anxiety rarely happens the way people expect it to. Most people imagine healing as a dramatic transformation. One breakthrough moment, one life-changing realization, one morning where they suddenly wake up feeling completely peaceful. But real healing is usually much quieter than that. It happens in small moments the nervous system slowly learns to trust. A slower breath, a calmer reaction, a peaceful morning that no longer feels suspicious. A moment of silence that no longer needs to be escaped. That is how the system begins shutting down, not through force, through repetition. For a long time I thought healing meant eliminating anxiety completely. I believed that one day I would finally become someone who never overthought, never felt emotionally overwhelmed, never experienced fear again. But eventually, I realized something important. The goal is not becoming a person who never feels anxiety. The goal is becoming a person whose nervous system no longer lives inside constant survival mode. That is a completely different kind of healing, because survival mode changes the way you experience everything. You stop fully living in the present. Your body stays braced for problems before problems happen. Even joyful moments become interrupted by anticipation. Part of your mind is always preparing to protect you from what could go wrong next, and eventually you become emotionally disconnected from your own life. You are physically present, but mentally elsewhere, somewhere in the future, trying to survive things that have not happened yet. I remember the first time I noticed genuine healing beginning inside me, not because I suddenly felt euphoric, because I experienced something incredibly ordinary. I was sitting alone early one morning drinking coffee by the window while it rained outside. No music, no phone, no distractions, and for the first time in years the silence did not feel threatening. I did not feel the need to escape it. I simply sat there peacefully. That moment sounds small, but emotionally it felt enormous, because my nervous system had spent years believing stillness was unsafe. And suddenly, for a few quiet minutes, my body stopped preparing for danger. That was healing, not perfection, safety. That is the twist many people misunderstand. Healing anxiety is not becoming emotionally invincible, it is becoming emotionally present. And presence can only happen when the nervous system finally realizes we do not need to survive every moment anymore. That realization changes the way you move through life. You stop rushing constantly. You stop treating rest like laziness. You stop believing every uncomfortable thought is an emergency. And slowly your body begins softening. Not instantly, gradually, one safe moment at a time. That is why healing requires consistency more than intensity. Tiny repeated signals of safety matter more than dramatic temporary breakthroughs. The nervous system learns through repetition. That means the small things matter deeply. How you begin your mornings matters. What your body experiences daily matters. What environments you repeatedly expose yourself to matters. What thoughts you reinforce matters. What relationships you tolerate matters. Everything trains the nervous system, including peace. One of the most powerful changes I made during my own healing was learning how to stop flooding my brain the moment I woke up. No immediate scrolling, no instant stimulation, no checking emails before my body fully woke up. Instead, silence, light, breathing, slow movement. At first it felt uncomfortable, almost boring, but eventually I realized how overstimulated my nervous system had been for years. Most anxious people do not actually experience calm consistently enough for the body to relearn it. And the nervous system cannot memorize peace it rarely experiences. That is why healing often feels repetitive. Because your body is learning a completely new emotional pattern, a new normal, one where silence is safe, rest is allowed, uncertainty is survivable, and your worth is not dependent on constant vigilance. There was another realization that changed my anxiety deeply. I stopped asking, how do I stop feeling anxious? And started asking, how do I create a life where my nervous system feels safer? That question shifted everything, because suddenly healing became practical instead of abstract. I started protecting my attention more carefully, protecting my sleep, protecting my environment, protecting my energy around emotionally chaotic people, protecting my body from constant overstimulation, and slowly my nervous system responded, not dramatically, but honestly. I slept more deeply, I reacted less impulsively. My chest stopped feeling tight all the time. Conversations felt lighter, silence stopped feeling empty, and one day I realized something I never thought possible. My mind was no longer constantly preparing for disaster. That may sound small to someone who has never experienced chronic anxiety, but for anxious people, that shift changes life completely. Because survival mode is exhausting, always scanning, always anticipating, always preparing emotionally. Eventually, the body becomes tired of carrying that weight. That is why healing often feels emotional. You are not only releasing stress, you are releasing years of unconscious survival patterns your nervous system thought it needed in order to stay safe. And the beautiful part is this: the nervous system can relearn peace. Human beings are incredibly adaptive. The same brain that learned hypervigilance can learn calm. The same body that memorized fear can memorize safety. The same nervous system that spent years bracing for danger can slowly learn how to rest again. That is hope, real hope, not motivational fantasy, biological hope, because anxiety is not your identity. It is a learned system. And learned systems can change, slowly, patiently, gently, not through shame, not through force, but through repeated experiences of safety, honesty, presence, rest, boundaries, and self-trust. That is how the hidden system behind anxiety finally begins shutting down. And when it does, something unexpected happens. Life stops feeling like something you are constantly trying to survive, and starts feeling like something you are finally able to live. Your mind does not have to live this way forever. If you have listened this far, there is a good chance you are tired. Not just physically tired, emotionally tired. Tired of overthinking every situation. Tired of carrying invisible tension in your body. Tired of preparing for problems before they happen. Tired of feeling emotionally alert, even during moments that are supposed to feel peaceful. And maybe the hardest part is that most people around you never fully see it. They see you functioning, showing up, responding, working, smiling, handling responsibilities. But they do not see the mental exhaustion of constantly living inside survival mode. They do not see how heavy it becomes to carry a nervous system that never fully relaxes. But hopefully, somewhere throughout this audiobook, something inside you began shifting. Maybe for the first time, you stopped viewing yourself as broken. Maybe you realized your anxiety is not random weakness, it is adaptation. Your mind learned survival. Your body learned hypervigilance. Your nervous system learned to stay prepared because at some point in life, staying alert felt necessary. And once you understand that, healing stops becoming self-hatred. It becomes self-understanding. That changes everything. Because many anxious people spend years fighting themselves. They criticize themselves for struggling. They feel ashamed for overthinking. They become frustrated that they cannot simply relax like other people seem to. But healing rarely begins through shame. The nervous system does not heal when it feels attacked. It heals when it feels safe. That safety is built slowly. Through boundaries, through rest, through honesty, through silence, through self-trust, through moments where your body no longer feels emotionally hunted by life. And maybe that process feels slow right now. That is okay. The nervous system changes through repetition, not perfection. A few peaceful moments repeated consistently can begin changing years of emotional conditioning. That matters more than most people realize. Because people often think healing must look dramatic to be real. But some of the deepest healing moments are almost invisible. The first full breath your body takes without tension. The first morning you wake up without immediately feeling dread. The first time silence feels comforting instead of uncomfortable. The first moment you stop needing to prepare emotionally for disaster. Those moments may seem small to other people, but to someone who has spent years trapped inside anxiety, they feel life-changing. I remember realizing my own healing was becoming real during a completely ordinary afternoon. I was sitting outside watching people walk by while sunlight moved slowly across the street. Nothing extraordinary was happening, and suddenly I noticed something strange. My mind was not scanning for danger. I was not replaying conversations. I was not anticipating problems. I was not mentally bracing for something bad to happen. I was simply present. That moment almost made me emotional because I realized how long it had been since my nervous system allowed me to experience life without preparing to survive it. And maybe one day you will experience a moment like that too. A quiet moment where your body softens without fear. A moment where your thoughts stop racing long enough for you to finally hear your own breathing again. A moment where peace no longer feels unfamiliar. Because despite what anxiety tells you, healing is possible. Not instant, not perfect, but absolutely possible. The human nervous system is incredibly adaptive. The same mind that learned fear can learn safety. The same body that memorized stress can relearn rest. The same nervous system that spent years surviving can slowly begin living again. So if there is one thing I hope you carry with you after this audiobook, let it be this. You are not weak because your nervous system became overwhelmed. You are human, and humans adapt to what they experience repeatedly. The beautiful part is that adaptation works both ways, which means peace can also become familiar again, slowly, patiently, one safe moment at a time. And if this audiobook helped you feel even slightly more understood tonight, share it with someone else who may be silently struggling too, because many people are carrying invisible anxiety while pretending they are okay. Sometimes the greatest thing we can give another person is the feeling that they are not alone in what they are experiencing, and maybe this is where your healing truly begins. Not when anxiety disappears completely, but when your nervous system finally realizes the danger is over, and you no longer have to spend your entire life preparing to survive it.